Hi, I'm Linda. Welcome to Beautiful Thrift Homemaking. I'm reading through a vintage novel from 1917. It's an instructional novel. It is a cookbook and it's a lot of fun. So I hope you'll join me. Today we're in chapter 19, 20, and 21. Bettina and the expense budget. Ruth asked me today how we manage our finances, said Bettina over the dinner table. She said that she and Fred were wondering what plan was best. I'm so glad I have a definite household allowance and that we have budgeted our expenses so successfully. The other day, I was reading an article by Carolyn Claymore in which she says that three-fourths of the domestic troubles are caused by disagreements about money. Then we haven't much to quarrel about, have we, Betty? That is true in more than one sense, but I'm sure that this way seems to suit us to a T. I'm even saving money, Bob. I don't see how you can when you give me such good things to eat and when we have so much company. Well, I plan ahead, plan for my leftovers before they're even left. I don't think, I do, I'm sorry, let me do that over. Well, I plan ahead, plan for my leftovers before they are left even. I do think that an instinct for buying and planning is better than an instinct for cooking. And either one can be cultivated. But it was certainly hard to get that budget of expenses fixed satisfactorily, wasn't it? I told Ruth that no two families are alike and that I couldn't tell her just what they ought to spend for clothes or just what groceries ought to cost. After all, it is an individual matter which things are necessities and which are luxuries. The chief thing is to live within your means and save as well as invest something, and at the same time be comfortable and happy. I told Ruth we started with the fixed sums and the absolute necessities and worked backward. I told her they must absolutely be saving something, if only a quarter a week. Then that Fred must manage the budget of expenses that comes within his realm and not interfere with hers, and that she must do the same with the household expenditures and not worry him. It takes a lot of adjusting to make the system work satisfactorily, but it is certainly worth it. Did you tell Ruth about the envelope system that my sister Harriet uses? She says she is so careless, naturally, that when George gives her her allowance each month, she has to put the actual cash in separate envelopes and then vow to herself that she will not borrow from the gas money to make the change for the grocer boy and so forth. That is the only way she can teach herself. My cousin's wife used to keep the most wonderful and complete accounts, but she couldn't tell without a lot of work in hunting up the items how much she already had spent for groceries or clothing or anything. She had to change her method, and it was she who taught me to keep my accounts in parallel columns, a page for a week, because you give me my allowance each week. I like this way so much, for I can tell at a glance how my expenses are comparing with the allotted sum. I like to look at your funny little I like to look at your funny, neat little notebook, Bettina, all rolled so carefully for the week, and the headings such as gas, electricity, groceries, meat, milk, laundry across the top. Don't make fun of my notebook. I couldn't keep house without it. In case of fire, I'd save it first of all. I know. It is almost like a diary to me. I can look back over it and remember that was the day Bob brought Mr. Green home and we almost ran out of potatoes. Or, this was the day I thought my brown bread had failed, but Bob seemed to like it, she exaggerated. Failures in cooking. Why, Bettina, I don't know the meaning of the words, and I don't see how you can feed me so well on the sum I give you for the purpose. I'd feel guilty, only you don't look a bit unhappy or overworked. I should say not. You surely don't remember how to cook all the things you give me. indeed, Bob. Not definitely, that is. You see, on the shelf by my account book, which you smile over, I have my card index with lots and lots of recipes filed away. Then I have notebooks too, with all sorts of suggestions tucked in them, just where I can lay my hand on them. Betty, dear, you've given me a real glimpse into your businesslike methods. Some men seem to think that it doesn't take brains to run a house well, but they don't know. It requires just as much executive ability and common sense as it does to manage a big business. That night, the dinner for two consisted of cold ham, green peppers stuffed with rice, light rolls, peach butter, and hot fudge cake. And we have the recipes in here for the light rolls, the green peppers stuffed with rice, and the hot fudge cake. All right. And on to chapter 20, Mrs. Dixon and Bettina's experiment. I'm so happy, said Mrs. Dixon as she stopped at Bettina's door one cool morning. But I'm nervous too. What if Frank shouldn't like it? Oh, but he will, Bettina assured her. He'll think he's the luckiest man in town, and I almost believe that he is. He'll love that dear little white house with the screened porch. Why, the very grass looks as if it longed to spell welcome, like some of the doormats I've seen. And think of the flower boxes. You were very fortunate to rent it for a year, furnished so nicely, and probably when that time is up, you'll be ready to build or buy one of your own. You are a dear to cheer me up this way, but I'm nervous in spite of you. Perhaps I should have consulted Frank before I promised to take the house. But he has been urging you to keep house for so long, and I know he'll be grateful to you for sparing him the worry of hunting one himself. Besides, he'll like being surprised. Well, I'll go back to the hotel for luncheon with him, and then I'll phone him later to meet me at the house. I won't tell him a thing. I'll just give him the address. I'll say it's very, very important. That will surprise him and perhaps will frighten him a little. He never does leave his office during business hours, but it will take only a few minutes for him to run out here in the car. Goodness, I'm forgetting what I came for. Do you suppose I am too stupid to try to make those Spanish buns Frank liked so much? We had them at the picnic, you know. I have 3 hours after lunch until he comes, and I just long to give him some good coffee and some Spanish buns that I've made myself. That little kitchen looks as if it would be so nice to work in. I tried coffee a little while ago over at the house, and really it was fun. It looked just like yours. I was so surprised to think of my doing such things. Of course you could make Spanish buns. It would be fine if you would. I'll tell you, why not let me come over for an hour right after luncheon and superintend? Then I'll slip home so that you can be alone when Frank comes. I could tell you some other things about cooking while we're there together, things you may write down in your new notebook. For example, I've often wondered that so few housekeepers can make good white sauce. What in the world is that? It's used in cream soups, and it's the cream part of creamed vegetables and meat and fish. And when there is a thicker white sauce that is used to bind croquettes, that is, hold the ingredients together, there are really 4 kinds of white sauces, and they are very simple to make. I think everyone should know the right way to make them, for they are useful in preparing so many good things. I'm glad we'll be near you because I can ask you so many questions. And I'm glad that it is summer because you can have so many things that require little or no cooking. And by fall, I'm sure you will be an accomplished housekeeper. Well, you come over at 2 then, or earlier if you can. Of course I will. And Mrs. Dixon hurried away. And as Mrs. Dixon hurried away, Bettina felt a sympathetic thrill at the happiness 2 other people were about to find. And Bettina's recipes include Spanish buns, confectioner's icing, which is for the buns, white sauces, for soup, for vegetable sauce, for patty sauce, and for croquette sauce. So 4 recipes for white sauces for different applications with the method for preparing them. And now into chapter 21, a rainy day dinner. The rain had been falling all day in a heavy downpour, and Bettina had ventured out only to gather some red clover blooms for the porch table, which she was now setting for dinner. In spite of the rain, it was not cold, and she liked the contrast of the cheerful little table with its white cloth and bright silver, and the great A just outside the screen. If Bob would only come home early, how nice it would be, she thought. Oh, perhaps that's he at the telephone now. However, it proved to be Mrs. Dixon. I phoned to ask you if I should throw away the yolks of 2 eggs. I've just used the whites. Oh, no, Mrs. Dixon. Beat them up well and add a little cold water to them, then set them in the icebox. They will be just as good later as they would be now. You may want them for salad dressing or something else. And if I ever have the white of the egg left, shall I treat that the same way? No, don't beat that up at all, nor add any water. Just set it in the refrigerator as it is. I'm so glad you called, Mrs. Dixon. Will you and your husband take dinner with us next Sunday? Perhaps we might all go to church first. Would love to do that. I've just been worrying over Sunday dinner, and you've restored my peace of mind. But won't it be a great deal of work for you? I won't let it be. I don't believe in those heavy, elaborate Sunday dinners that take all the morning to prepare. We'll just come home from church and have it in half an hour. You may help me. Would love to come. I have so much to tell you. I've been very busy, but Frank has helped, and it has been such fun. You don't know how he enjoys the little house. Well, goodbye till tomorrow. Boo, shouted Bob in her ear as she hung up the receiver. I discovered your dark secret this morning. Frank Dixon told me. Well, what did you think of it? The only possible solution in that case. You are their good angel, that is, if she doesn't poison Frank with her cooking, or burn the house down when she's lighting the fire. She won't, don't worry. She takes to housekeeping as if she had always done it. Her house is immaculate. She has been cleaning and dusting and polishing from morning to night. I'm almost ashamed of mine. I'm not, Bob said decidedly. I don't see how you can keep it clean at all with a man like me scattering papers and cigar ashes everywhere. And I'm always losing my belongings, and always will, I suppose. That's only a sign that we haven't discovered the proper place for them all yet. That's only a sign that we haven't discovered the proper place for them all yet. But we'll work it out in time. Well, are you hungry? Hungry? I should say so. Why, I could almost eat you. Well, Bob, we have a rainy day dinner tonight that I hope you'll enjoy. Hash. Does that frighten you? Not your hash, Betty. Well, everything is ready. The rainy evening menu consisted of browned hash, creamed cauliflower, date muffins, butter, applesauce cake, and chocolate. And the recipes are given for browned hash, creamed cauliflower, date muffins, applesauce cake. And stay with me and we'll do a discussion of these 3 chapters. Thank you. All right, time for our deep dive into chapters 19, 20, and 21. Chapter 19, as chapter 16, was also about budgeting. Chapter 19 is talking about household allowance and open communication about sharing the priorities of money management, agreeing on what's necessary versus what is a luxury, she's talking about planning for the use of leftovers, how important that is, to be deliberate in that. I wonder how you're doing with that. That I like the word she used. She used the word cultivated, that this budgeting can be learned, it can be cultivated. So keep that in mind and don't think that you're just a failure with it. Realize that we can all learn and grow in this area. She did say it's important to live within your means. And we do know that, don't we? And we do have to work on that and remind ourselves of that. It's important also to save. She said, even if you can only save a quarter a week. Imagine that. Okay, so I don't know what that quarter, I should look that up. What is a quarter from 1917 worth in today's money? That'd be fun to know. Then, you know what? I'm going to pause and look that up, and then I'll get back with you. All right, so I looked that up. It says that in general, 1 quarter in 1917 would be approximately $5 to $6.25 in today's value. So Bettina's suggesting that even if you can save $5 a week or $6.25 a week, that you should work towards that. Okay, so for us that would be 5 times 4 would be $20 a month, and times 12, $240 a year could be saved if you followed this advice. So don't think that these things are insignificant. They do add up, don't they? And she also suggests that money is invested. And she wants us to look at our fixed expenses first and work backwards. Consider our income, our fixed expenses, calculate that out, and then work backwards from there to figure out what you have play with. And Bob talked about the envelope system, and I'm sure that you've heard about that. I think that's a great idea and a great way to work. However, it does work for cash. And so if you're using a debit card or a credit card to make your purchases, perhaps you're saving points for a flight, and so you're using a credit card and then just paying it off regularly before interest is charged. Or if you are using a debit card for convenience and not using cash, then the envelope system will not work for you. But if you are using cash or can train yourself on this system for a while, that would be beneficial. You may need to do that depending on what your circumstances are. So the envelope system is where you get some just mailing envelopes. It doesn't matter the size, they just need to be able to hold some dollar bills and 20s and so forth. And then what you're going to do is you're going to put a label on each envelope for a category of expenses. One might be, for example, groceries. One might be rent or mortgage payment. One might be gasoline or diesel fuel, whichever your vehicle takes. One might be utilities. And you may need more than one for utilities because maybe you have propane or natural gas in addition to electricity and so forth. So for each category, each different place that you spend money, for each different thing that you spend money on, you would put a label on an envelope. And then, so with all those envelopes, then at the beginning of the pay period, when you first have your pay money, you go ahead and divvy it up into your envelopes. Now, you're going to put the fixed expenses in first. You're going to put in what you need for your rent. You're going to need to put in what you need for anything else that's a set amount, that's a given. Maybe you're making payments towards a medical bill and you've agreed to pay $50 a month. Then you're going to put that $50 in that medical envelope. And then after that, you're going to just decide on what your budget had been for groceries, and you put that amount of money in your envelope for groceries and so forth. Okay, so you're going to have a savings envelope. And that's going to be one of your fixed expenses. You're going to decide, I'm going to save $20 a month. I'm going to save $150 a month. Whatever it is that works for your budget, you're going to put that in the savings envelope, and you're going to seal that up and not touch it. Okay? And then if you have an investment envelope, then you could work on that, gaining money that you can put into an investment of some sort. So that's the envelope system. And then as you go through your month, as you're at the grocery store, you pay with money that's in your food allowance envelope. And if you're running out of money, then you start thinking about how to save money and what you can use that you have in your pantry. And we talked about pantries and the importance of having an emergency shelf and staples in your pantry. So this is where that really comes in helpful when we start running low towards the end of the month or towards the end of a pay period. So that is a really good technique to use. Hopefully that's something that can be useful to you. Now, parallel columns. So now what Bettina's talking about here is that she's keeping a notebook and she's writing down the expenses in categories on a page, one page per week, so she can glance and see how much she's spending and know where her money's going. And that's a key, isn't it, in budgeting, is to know where your money is going. You should track it for a while if you don't know. And then you'll find out how much does it cost you for food and where you may have been careless and lax, and it can be tightened up quite a bit if you put the effort into thinking about your meals and your food costs and where are you shopping. Could you shop at a less expensive place? Could you turn to more reasonable foods? Can you use dried beans sometimes and rice instead of always having meat and so forth? So these are things to consider. And then also, I liked Bob's compliment, and it's so true what he said to her, that an executive ability and common sense is needed to run a house. And if it's your job to run your home and keep track of your household budget, then it's your job to be a good steward of the money that's given for that. All right, now if you're the one making the money and running the house both, then you know what your labor is worth and how hard you work for that money. And you just don't want to just let it just slip out of your fingers needlessly. You want, remember that idea of opportunity cost I talked about in another video, where our money can only be spent once, and once it's spent, it's gone, and you lose the opportunity then to buy other things with that same amount of money. So we always want to consider what are our options for spending. Do I want to drive through Taco Bell, or do I want to make some beans at home and plan to make them the night before by soaking them the night before and then putting them in the pressure cooker or the crock pot during the day and having them ready so I don't have to run through Taco Bell. So that's the kind of idea that we have here. I think that Bettina is very wise in staying content with the budget that she's given, because contentment is so important for our happiness, isn't it? And for the happiness within a marriage, that we be content and that we try to work within the constraints that are given to us. So keep that in mind and just do a little soul searching and see how you're doing on that. Now, chapter 20 was a shift, because we're back to the story of Mrs. Dixon. Remember that the Dixons live in a hotel, and that Mrs. Dixon was raised in a hotel. She doesn't know how to keep a house. She's never done cooking. She, in fact, has not ever even made coffee before. And Bettina has been helping her find a house. And so here we are. We found a furnished house, and she's going to rent it for a year. And it's a surprise for Mrs. Dixon's husband. And she's going to ask him to come over and meet her there. And she's going to surprise him. She wants to serve him coffee and Spanish buns when he comes to see the house that will be theirs for the next year. So Bettina is going to mentor Mrs. Dixon. and she's going to help her to get everything set up. Bettina's encouraging Mrs. Dixon to keep a notebook, to remember that writing things down is very helpful to keep your memory on tips and recipes and so forth. And white sauce is the key thing that Bettina wants to emphasize for Mrs. Dixon starting out to learn to cook. White sauce we've talked about before. It's in many of the recipes. In fact, I looked over the last chapters, that the first 20 chapters of this cookbook have the following recipes: creamed tuna, new potatoes in cream, potatoes Anna, egg sauce, which was served over salmon, lamb gravy, creamed veal, and creamed beef. And those are all foundational, all have white sauce as their foundation. So she's already used a lot of recipes with that same base. And I love that she shows how to make them differently for creaming vegetables versus the meats versus, she added an egg yolk, for example, to the white sauce that's made to put over this salmon, and it's called an egg sauce. And then the ones that are made with the gravy, made as gravy with meat sauces after the meat is cooked, of course, are a form of white sauce, but we call them gravy. So that was very, very helpful. If you don't know how to make white sauces, then I would recommend that you look into that. It is, of course, going to be something that takes a little bit of usually all-purpose flour. So if you are avoiding wheat, then you might want to look for alternatives. I can't really help you with that, but the white sauces do have flour in them. Although it's very little, it's used as a thickener. If you buy a can of Campbell's cream of mushroom soup, you'll find that it has modified food starch in it as well as wheat flour. And those two ingredients in the soup are serving as thickeners. And so you can avoid the modified food starch and the prepared and processed foods by making your own white sauces. You can make your own cream of mushroom soup, for example, by making a white sauce and adding some mushrooms to it. And so I hope you'll look into that and explore white sauces, and let me know down below in the comments if you have mastered the white sauce and if it's something that you use in your cooking. We're going to move on to chapter 21 now. I was really happy to see the applesauce cake recipe because it reminded me of something I saw on my vacation. I went to Port Orford, Oregon, and I went to the Lifeboat Station Museum. And in the display case, I saw a recipe of a applesauce cake. And it was an old vintage recipe. I'll try to post that picture of that display for you. And I compared that recipe with the one in our book for the applesauce cake. And they were almost identical, In the Lifeboat Museum, the cook had added a little bit of baking powder, and he had 1/4 of a cup, more or less, of flour, but otherwise the recipes were the same. So I'm looking forward to trying that applesauce cake. And then also we have another creamed vegetable in this chapter. We have the creamed cauliflower, so that's another use for the white sauce, and that sounds really good to me. And I want to point out that Mrs. Dixon was not afraid to ask questions. She phoned Bettina to ask her about whether she should save some egg yolks when she had a recipe she was using that called for egg whites. She thought, what should I do with these extra egg yolks? I'm not going to be needing them for what I'm doing right now. And Bettina says, no, don't throw them away. She gave us the technique to use when storing egg yolks. She said to beat them with a little bit of cold water and then put them in the ice box. And we know that the word ice box is what we call our refrigerator. And back in that day, she was using block ice to keep things cold in her ice box. And thankfully, we don't need to do that anymore. We have our refrigerators that work without having to buy ice to keep everything cold. But anyway, so you refrigerate the egg yolks and you refrigerate egg whites just as they are without beating them first or adding any water. So we don't want to be wasteful, and you can think the next day how you can incorporate those into what you're going to make. Maybe plan to make something with egg sauce over salmon, for example, uses the egg yolks. So if you've done something with egg whites one day, maybe the next day plan to use those egg yolks that were left over for some white sauce, some egg sauce to put over some fish, and give that a try. All right, and then Bettina, she keeps inviting people over, doesn't she, to share a meal. And that's a wonderful thing that she's modeling hospitality for us. She's also going to have someone over again for a Sunday meal after church. She's planning ahead for that. And she talked with Bob about finding a place for everything and keeping everything in its place. And that's something that they're working towards. Bob says that he's naturally messy and doesn't seem to be able to find his things. And Bettina says, well, we'll work on finding the right place for your things so that you will find them. So she's got just a really light attitude about Bob's messiness. She's keeping everything in perspective, and I'm feeling real good about that. I wanted to share with you a verse from the Bible from Titus chapter 2, verses 3 to 5, because this is, of course, my motivation for having this channel, and I've shared this verse before, but it fits in here with Mrs. Dixon not being afraid to ask questions. So just let's take a look at that. Older women are to be reverent in behavior, not slanderers or slaves to much wine. They are to teach what is good and to train the young women to love their husbands and children, to be self-controlled, pure, working at home, kind, and submissive to their own husbands, that the word of God may not be reviled. All right, so in the Bible we read that older women are to teach the younger about keeping their homes and to love their husbands and children. Well, you know, Mrs. Dixon is an older woman herself. I'm assuming that because Bettina calls her Mrs. Dixon. And other friends that Bettina has that are her own age, she calls by their first names. So I believe that Mr. and Mrs. Dixon are older than Bob and Bettina, and they're being respectful by calling them Mr. and Mrs. So in this case, things are swapped because Mrs. Dixon didn't have the advantage of an older woman teaching her to be a homemaker. Here she's having to ask a younger lady who does know and who is enthusiastic and has a lot of knowledge. So whatever your age, if you need help learning anything about homemaking or cooking, don't be afraid to ask. And if you're in a church community, look for an older woman who you can ask, someone who you admire. And I'm sure she would be so blessed to help you. All right. So until next time, thank you for joining me, and please comment and hit like if you would